The first time I saw her, my coffee cup slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble floor of my corner office. Hot liquid splashed across my Louboutin heels, but I barely felt the burn. 40 floors below, on the busy sidewalk of Peachtree Street, a woman with matted gray hair and clothes that had seen too many nights under bridges was holding a cardboard sign. The sign read, "Hungry. God bless." But it wasn't the sign that made my blood turn to ice. It was the woman holding it. Even from this distance, even through the dirt and the years and the pain etched into her weathered face, I knew exactly who she was. My mother, Evelyn Carter, once the most elegant woman in our small Alabama town, was now sitting cross-legged on the cold concrete outside Sterling and Amp Associates, the law firm where I worked as a senior partner. She was begging for money from the same people who paid me 7 figures a year to handle their legal affairs. I stepped back from the window so quickly that I knocked over my chair. The sound echoed through my spacious office like a gunshot, and my assistant knocked on the door immediately. "Ms. Washington, is everything okay?" "Fine," I called out, my voice cracking like a teenager's. "Everything's fine, Jennifer. Just clumsy this morning." But nothing was fine. Nothing had been fine for 3 years. Not since the last time I spoke to my mother. Not since the day I told her that if she couldn't stay sober, she couldn't be part of my life. My name is Diana Washington, and at 38 years old I had everything I thought I wanted. A corner office in one of Atlanta's most prestigious law firms. A penthouse apartment in Buckhead with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. A garage full of luxury cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. A reputation as one of the most ruthless and successful attorneys in the Southeast. Someone who never lost a case that mattered and never backed down from a challenge. But standing at that window, staring down at the broken woman who had given me life, I realized that everything I thought I had built was nothing more than an elaborate house of cards. And my mother, homeless, desperate, and begging for spare change, had the power to bring it all crashing down with a single word. I had clawed my way up from nothing, from a double-wide trailer in rural Alabama where the biggest aspiration most kids had was getting a job at the chicken processing plant that dominated our town's economy. The trailer park where I grew up was a place where dreams went to die, where teenage girls got pregnant and dropped out of school, where men worked themselves to death in minimum-wage jobs that would never provide enough to escape. But my mother had refused to let that be my story. Evelyn Carter was 19 when she had me, barely older than the high school students I used to tutor for extra money during law school. She had been beautiful then. Not just pretty, but genuinely beautiful in the way that turned heads and stopped conversations when she walked into a room. She had the kind of natural elegance that couldn't be taught or bought, the kind of grace that made people assume she came from money even when she was wearing clothes from the thrift store. She could have married any of a dozen boys in our town, could have chosen someone with prospects or family money or at least the promise of stability. Instead, she fell in love with Tommy Washington, a charming drifter who was passing through Alabama on his way to somewhere else and never quite made it out of town. Tommy had stayed long enough to get my mother pregnant and to promise her the world, but not long enough to keep those promises. By the time I was 2 years old, he was gone, leaving behind nothing but child support payments that came sporadically when he remembered and a last name that my mother insisted I keep because she said every child deserved to know where they came from. So Evelyn raised me alone in a town where single motherhood was considered a moral failing, and where being poor meant people looked at you like you had chosen your circumstances out of laziness or weakness. She worked double shifts at Ruby's Diner, the only restaurant in town that stayed open past 9 p.m., coming home with her feet swollen in cheap shoes and grease stains on her uniform that never quite washed out. But she never came home without asking about my homework first. I remember her sitting at our tiny kitchen table at midnight, her waitress uniform still on, helping me with math problems while she counted the day's tips in stacks of crumpled 1s and 5s. I remember her driving me to debate tournaments in our ancient Honda Civic that overheated every 30 miles, pulling over to let the engine cool while she practiced my arguments with me in the shade of highway billboards. I remember her taking on extra shifts to pay for my SAT prep books, for my college application fees, for the interview outfits I needed when universities started offering me scholarships. She never complained about the sacrifice, never made me feel guilty for wanting more than our small town could offer. "Education is the only thing they can't take away from you," she used to tell me while she braided my hair for school pictures. Her fingers gentle and sure as they worked ribbons into patterns that made me feel beautiful even when I was wearing hand-me-down clothes. "You get your education, baby girl, and you can go anywhere, be anything. The world will be yours." But the world had taken something from her in return. The stress of working 70-hour weeks, of raising a child alone, of never having enough money to feel secure. It had worn her down in ways that weren't visible until it was too late. The drinking started slowly. A beer after particularly hard shifts. A glass of wine when the bills piled up and the numbers didn't add up no matter how many times she recalculated them. Then it was a bottle of wine with dinner, then wine with lunch, then wine instead of lunch. I was 16 when I found the vodka bottles hidden in her bedroom closet, tucked behind winter coats she never had occasion to wear in Alabama's mild climate. I was 17 when she lost her job at Ruby's for showing up drunk to a shift. I was 18 when I came home from my high school graduation, valedictorian, full ride to Auburn University, and found her passed out on the bathroom floor with pills scattered around her like confetti. That was the beginning of the worst 2 years of my life. College should have been my escape, my chance to become the person my mother had always believed I could be. Instead, it was a constant juggling act between maintaining my grades and managing the crisis that my mother's life had become. She went through rehab programs that she couldn't afford, and that didn't take. She moved in with men who promised to take care of her but who really just wanted someone to take care of them. She lost jobs and apartments and friends, burning through relationships like matches. And through it all she called me. 3 a.m. phone calls from hospital emergency rooms when she had overdosed or mixed pills with alcohol. Frantic messages on my dorm room answering machine when she had been evicted and needed money for a motel room. Slurred conversations where she cried about how sorry she was, how much she loved me, how she was going to get clean this time she promised. I sent money I didn't have. I drove the 3 hours from Auburn to Alabama more weekends than I didn't. I lied to my professors about family emergencies and to my friends about why I never had money for social activities. I maintained a perfect GPA while my mother slowly destroyed herself, and I told myself that if I could just be successful enough, if I could just make enough money, if I could just become important enough, I could save her. Law school was my chance to finally escape, to create enough distance that her problems couldn't drag me down. Harvard was as far from Alabama as I could get, geographically and culturally. And for 3 years I threw myself into my studies with the intensity of someone running from a burning building. I graduated summa cum laude. I landed a prestigious clerkship with a federal appellate judge. I was recruited by top firms in New York, Boston, and Atlanta. I chose Atlanta because it was close enough to Alabama to help my mother if she truly got clean, but far enough away to build a life that wasn't defined by her addiction. For a while it seemed to work. My mother went through another treatment program, the 5th one in 10 years, and this time it took. She stayed sober for 18 months, got a job at a different restaurant, moved into a small apartment that she kept clean and organized. We talked on the phone every Sunday, and the conversations were normal for the first time in years. She was proud of my success, proud that her daughter was making headlines in legal publications and earning more money in a year than most people in our hometown would see in a lifetime. She started telling people at work about her lawyer daughter, carrying newspaper clippings about my cases in her purse like other mothers carried photos of grandchildren. I let myself believe that the worst was behind us. I let myself believe that love and determination and success could overcome addiction. I let myself believe that my mother was finally the woman she had always had the potential to be. I was wrong. The relapse happened gradually, so slowly that I didn't recognize it until it was too late. The Sunday phone calls became shorter, more erratic. She canceled a planned visit to Atlanta, claiming she couldn't get time off work. When I called the restaurant to check on her, they told me she had stopped showing up 2 weeks earlier. I drove to Alabama and found her in a condition that was worse than anything I had seen before. The apartment was filthy, filled with empty bottles and drug paraphernalia I didn't recognize. She had lost 30 pounds and looked like someone decades older than her 55 years. Worse, she seemed to have lost the essential spark that had made her who she was, the strength, the grace, the fierce love that had driven her to sacrifice everything for my future. "Diana, baby," she said when she opened the door, and her voice was slurred and distant. "You came to see me. Mama, what happened? You were doing so well." "I'm fine, baby. Just tired. Work's been hard." But she hadn't been working in weeks, and we both knew it. She was high on something that made her pupils tiny pinpricks and her movements slow and uncoordinated. The woman who had once been the most elegant person in our town was now a shell of herself, destroyed by chemicals that had stolen everything that made her beautiful. I spent 3 days cleaning her apartment, trying to get her to eat, flushing pills and bottles down the toilet while she slept. On the 4th day, she begged me for money, not for rent or food, but for drugs, though she called it medicine for her back pain. When I refused, she became someone I didn't recognize. "You think you're better than me now," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "You think because you went to college, because you wear fancy clothes, because you make all that money you can judge me? I'm not judging you, Mama. I'm trying to help you. I don't need your help. I need you to stop acting like you're ashamed of me." The words hit me like physical blows because they weren't entirely wrong. I was ashamed, not of who she used to be, but of what she had become. I was ashamed of the chaos that surrounded her, of the lies she told, of the way addiction had turned the strongest person I knew into someone weak and manipulative and destructive. "I can't do this anymore," I said finally, and the words felt like swallowing glass. "I can't keep enabling you. I can't keep pretending that love is enough to fix this. So you're abandoning me. Your own mother. I'm setting boundaries. If you want me in your life, you need to get clean. Really clean. Not just for a few months this time. And if I can't..." I looked at her, this woman who had given me everything good in my life and who was now asking me to watch her destroy herself slowly, and I made the hardest decision of my life. "Then you can't be part of my life anymore." I left Alabama that night and didn't look back. For 3 years, I kept that promise to myself and to her. I built my career, earned my reputation, created a life that was successful and controlled and completely disconnected from the chaos of addiction. I told myself I was protecting myself, that I was finally free to become the person I was meant to be without my mother's problems weighing me down. I dated successful men who knew nothing about my background. I joined social clubs where conversations revolved around wine tastings and charity galas rather than overdoses and interventions. I bought expensive clothes and learned to appreciate fine art and convinced myself that I had transcended my origins. But standing at my office window, looking down at my mother begging for spare change on the street below, I realized that I hadn't transcended anything. I had just become very good at pretending. The woman begging on the street below used to read me bedtime stories in a voice like honey and southern comfort. She used to braid my hair every Sunday morning before church, her gentle fingers working magic with ribbons and bobby pins. She used to work double shifts at the diner to pay for my school supplies, coming home with swollen feet and grease stains on her uniform, but always asking about my homework first. That was before the drinking, before the pills, before the series of men who promised to love her but only wanted to use her, before the evictions and the repossessions and the nights when I found her passed out on the bathroom floor. That was before I learned that love wasn't enough to save someone who didn't want to be saved. I watched from my window as Evelyn held her sign with shaking hands. Even from 40 floors up, I could see the tremor that ran through her body. Withdrawal, probably, or the DTs that had landed her in the emergency room so many times when I was growing up. A businessman in an expensive suit dropped $1 into the cup beside her without making eye contact. She nodded gratefully, and I caught a glimpse of the smile that used to light up my whole world. My intercom buzzed. "Diana, your 10 a.m. is here. The Henderson merger. The Henderson merger. A $50 million deal that would make or break a family's business empire. The kind of high-stakes negotiation that had made my reputation and my fortune." "Give me 5 minutes," I said, still staring down at the woman who had given birth to me, raised me, and loved me until addiction stole her away from both of us. I pulled the blinds closed and tried to pretend I hadn't seen her. But pretending had never been my strength, and it wasn't working now. Through 3 hours of merger negotiations, I kept thinking about those shaking hands. The opposing counsel, a shark from a white-shoe New York firm, was trying to restructure the deal in ways that would devastate the Henderson family's interests, but I found it almost impossible to concentrate on his manipulations when all I could think about was my mother sitting in the cold outside my building. "Ms. Washington," said James Henderson, the patriarch whose family business we were trying to save, "are you all right? You seem distracted." I looked at him, a man in his 70s who had built his company from nothing and who was now fighting to keep it from being carved up by corporate vultures, and saw something of my own father in his weathered face. Not Tommy Washington, the charming drifter who had abandoned us, but the father figure I had created in my imagination. Strong, protective, someone who would never let his family down. "I'm fine, Mr. Henderson. Just evaluating our options." But I wasn't evaluating legal options. I was thinking about the choices that had led me to this moment, the decisions that had created a life where I could afford to pay more for lunch than my mother probably saw in a week, but where I was too ashamed of her to acknowledge her existence. Through lunch with federal judge Patricia Morrison, who was considering me for appointment to a Blue Ribbon Commission on Criminal Justice Reform, I kept hearing the echo of that honey-sweet voice singing lullabies. Judge Morrison was discussing the need for attorneys who understood the intersection of addiction and crime, who could help reform a system that often criminalized illness rather than addressing its root causes. "We need people who understand that addiction doesn't respect class or race or education," she was saying, cutting into her salmon with precise movements. "People who recognize that behind every addiction case is a human story that deserves compassion as well as accountability." I nodded and made appropriate responses, but inside I was drowning in irony. Here I was being considered for a position focused on addiction and criminal justice, while my own mother was begging for money on the street outside my office and I was too cowardly to even acknowledge her existence. Through an afternoon of depositions and contract reviews, I kept seeing the face that used to kiss my scraped knees and tell me that everything would be okay. The case I was working on involved a family whose patriarch had embezzled money from his own company to pay for his gambling addiction. As I reviewed the evidence of his deception, I found myself thinking about the different ways that addiction destroys families, sometimes through theft and lies, sometimes through abandonment and denial. At 5:30, when Jennifer left for the day, I found myself back at the window. The blinds were still closed, but I opened them with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb. She was still there. Evelyn had moved to a different spot, closer to the building's main entrance, where the foot traffic was heavier. Her cardboard sign was soggy from an afternoon drizzle, but she held it with the same determination she used to show when she was working 16-hour days to keep our lights on. A thin woman with stringy hair had joined her, and they were sharing what looked like a single sandwich between them. The sight of my mother breaking her meager food in half to share with someone who had even less than she did made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. As I watched, a group of young lawyers from my firm walked past her on their way to happy hour at the upscale bar across the street. I recognized them. Associates from the corporate division, kids fresh out of law school who wore their privilege like expensive cologne and who thought they understood the world because they could analyze complex financial instruments. One of them, a blonde woman named Jessica whose trust fund had paid for her Yale education, looked down at my mother with the kind of disgust usually reserved for stepping in something unpleasant. "Disgusting," Jessica said loudly enough for Evelyn to hear. "Why don't they just get jobs like normal people? There's no excuse for being homeless in America if you're willing to work." Her companion, a young man named Bradford whose family owned half of Buckhead, laughed and shook his head. "They probably make more money begging than they would working minimum wage. It's a complete scam. They're professional victims." A third associate, someone I barely knew from the tax division, pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is going on my Instagram story. Another day, another dollar in downtown Atlanta. My followers love this real-life content." I watched my mother's shoulders curl inward, watched her pull her torn jacket tighter around her body as if it could shield her from their words. I saw her look down at her hands, at the dirt under her fingernails and the sores on her knuckles, and I saw something die in her eyes, the same spark of dignity that had carried her through years of working multiple jobs and raising a child alone. And I did nothing. I stood in my temperature-controlled office wearing a suit that cost more than she probably saw in 6 months, and I watched strangers humiliate the woman who had sacrificed everything to give me a chance at a better life. I watched them mock her poverty, record her desperation for their social media entertainment, and treat her like she was less than human. Because I was a coward. Because I was more concerned about protecting my reputation than protecting my mother. Because I had spent so many years running from my past that I had forgotten how to recognize the people who had made my present possible. The next morning, I arrived at the office an hour early, hoping she would be gone. But Evelyn was already there, sitting in the same spot with the same sign, wearing what looked like the same clothes. She had probably slept somewhere nearby, a doorway maybe, or a park bench if security hadn't moved her along during the night. I took the elevator to the 40th floor and went straight to my office without looking out the window. But I could feel her presence like a weight on my chest, like a gravitational pull that made it impossible to focus on anything else. I tried to review briefs for an upcoming trial, but the words swam before my eyes. I attempted to return phone calls to clients, but I found myself hanging up mid-conversation, unable to concentrate on their legal problems when my own mother was suffering just a few hundred feet below. Every time someone knocked on my door or my phone rang, I jumped like a guilty child caught stealing cookies. When the managing partner stopped by to discuss my potential promotion to the executive committee, I could barely follow the conversation. When a prospective client called to discuss a major corporate acquisition, I found myself agreeing to terms without properly analyzing them. At lunchtime, I ordered from my usual restaurant and had it delivered to the office so I wouldn't have to risk running into her on the street. The food tasted like ash in my mouth. At 3 p.m., when I usually took a walk around the block to clear my head, I stayed inside and did yoga in my office instead, stretching out the tension that had settled in my shoulders and neck. But I couldn't stop checking the window. Every few minutes, I found myself pulled to the glass like a moth to flame. I would lift one corner of the blinds and peer down at the street, looking for her familiar figure among the pedestrians and street vendors. Sometimes she was there, sometimes she had moved to a different corner, but she was always somewhere within sight of my building. By Tuesday evening, I realized that she wasn't going anywhere. This wasn't a temporary stop on some larger journey. This was where she lived now, on the street outside the office where her daughter worked, close enough to see the evidence of my success but too far away to share in it. By Wednesday, the weight of the secret was affecting my work in ways that other people were starting to notice. During a partners' meeting, I lost track of a complex argument about billing procedures and had to ask the speaker to repeat information I should have absorbed easily. During a client conference call, I agreed to take on a case that was outside my area of expertise simply because I hadn't been paying attention to the details. "Diana, are you feeling all right?" asked Richard Sterling, the managing partner whose family name was on the building. "You seem distracted lately." "Just tired," I lied. "I've been putting in long hours on the Pemberton acquisition." But that wasn't true either. The Pemberton acquisition was proceeding smoothly, and I had been working fewer hours than usual because I couldn't concentrate on anything for more than a few minutes at a time. By Thursday, Evelyn had been there for a week straight. She had attracted the attention of other homeless people, and now there was a small community of them clustered around the entrance to my building. They shared food and blankets, looked out for each other when police or security tried to move them along, and created a makeshift family out of society's forgotten people. I overheard conversations in the elevator, lawyers and executives complaining about the vagrant problem outside their prestigious workplace. Someone suggested calling the police to have them arrested for loitering. Someone else recommended installing sprinkler systems to discourage them from sleeping nearby, like they were pigeons fouling a statue rather than human beings seeking shelter. "It's bad for our image," said Margaret Rothschild, a senior partner whose corner office was even larger than mine. "Clients don't want to step over homeless people to get to their attorney's office. We need to find a solution." "What kind of solution?" asked James Mitchell, a younger partner who specialized in corporate law. "The kind that makes the problem go away permanently," Margaret replied with a cold efficiency that had made her one of the most feared litigators in the Southeast. They were talking about my mother like she was a pest to be exterminated, a problem to be solved through force rather than compassion. And still I said nothing. Friday morning brought a cold snap that turned Atlanta's usual warmth into something bitter and biting. I dressed in my heaviest coat and warmest boots, but even in the heated comfort of my car, I could feel the chill seeping through the windows. The weather forecast called for temperatures in the 30s, with a chance of sleet that would make conditions dangerous for anyone without adequate shelter. I thought about Evelyn, somewhere out there in the cold with nothing but a thin jacket and whatever cardboard she could find to insulate herself from the concrete. I thought about her arthritic hands, the ones that used to massage my shoulders when I was stressed about school exams, now exposed to wind and cold that could cause permanent damage. I thought about her feet, probably swollen and painful in whatever shoes she could scavenge, walking on concrete that would leach the heat from her body with every step. By the time I reached my office, I was crying so hard I had to sit in the parking garage for 10 minutes to compose myself. I used the employee bathroom to wash my face and reapply makeup, trying to erase the evidence of my emotional breakdown. But my eyes remained red and swollen, and my hands shook as I tried to fix my appearance. When I finally made it upstairs, Jennifer was waiting with my usual morning briefing and a concerned expression. "Diana, are you feeling all right? You look..." "I'm fine," I said quickly, settling into my chair and avoiding her eyes. "Just tired. Long week. Well, maybe you should take the afternoon off. There's nothing urgent on your calendar, and you've been pushing yourself pretty hard lately. When's the last time you took a real vacation?" I couldn't remember the last time I had taken a vacation, or even a weekend off that wasn't consumed by work-related activities. My life had become a carefully structured routine of billable hours and client meetings and partnership obligations, with no room for anything that didn't contribute to my professional success. I was about to decline Jennifer's suggestion when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. "Diana Washington." "Diana. Baby, is that really you?" The voice hit me like a physical blow. It was my mother's voice, but smaller somehow. Fragile. Tired. I could hear traffic in the background and the sound of other voices, probably other homeless people sharing whatever phone she was using. "How did you get this number?" I asked someone at the information desk in your building. "Diana, I need help. I'm in trouble." I closed my eyes, feeling Jennifer's curious gaze on my face. She was probably wondering who could reduce me to tears with a simple phone call, why someone was calling me baby during business hours. "I can't talk right now. I'm at work. Please, baby. Just 5 minutes. I'm at the hospital and they say I can make one phone call before they have to call the police." "The police? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything wrong, I swear on your daddy's grave. I was just trying to get warm and the man at the store said I was stealing, but I wasn't. I just wanted to get out of the cold for a few minutes, maybe buy a cup of coffee if I had enough money." My heart was racing now. I could picture her in some sterile hospital room, probably handcuffed to a bed rail, surrounded by people who saw her as a criminal rather than a human being who was cold and desperate. "Which hospital?" "Grady." "Diana, they want to arrest me for trespassing, but I told them I have a daughter who's a lawyer. I told them you could vouch for me." The irony was so bitter I could taste it. For a week, I had watched her beg outside my office, pretending she was a stranger. Now she was in a hospital emergency room, using my name and profession to try to stay out of jail, still believing that her daughter would come to her rescue despite years of silence between us. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, grabbing my coat and purse. Jennifer looked up in surprise. "Diana, what about your 2 p.m. with the Patterson case? And you have that conference call with the Seattle firm at 4. "Reschedule everything," I said, already heading for the elevator. "Cancel everything. Family emergency." It wasn't until I was in my car, racing through downtown Atlanta traffic with my emergency flashers on, that I realized I had finally acknowledged what Evelyn was to me. Family. The word felt strange after 3 years of pretending I didn't have a mother. 3 years of building a life that had no room for complicated family relationships or inconvenient emotional attachments. But family was exactly what she was, and family was exactly what I had been running from. Grady Hospital's emergency room was exactly as I remembered from my childhood. Crowded, understaffed, and filled with the kind of people who used emergency rooms as their primary care physicians because they couldn't afford anything else. The waiting area was packed with crying children, elderly people with oxygen tanks, and young men with injuries that probably came from violence rather than accidents. The smell hit me as soon as I walked through the automatic doors. Disinfectant trying and failing to cover up human misery, cleaning products that couldn't quite mask the scent of blood and vomit and fear. It was the smell of my childhood, the scent that clung to my mother's clothes after her frequent trips to emergency rooms for overdoses and alcohol poisoning. I found Evelyn in a curtained-off area in the back, sitting on an examination table with her wrists handcuffed to the bed rail. She was wearing a hospital gown that had seen better decades, and someone had cleaned the dirt from her face, revealing features that were still beautiful despite everything addiction had stolen from her. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "Diana, oh baby, you came. I wasn't sure. I know it's been so long, and I know you're angry with me." I stood frozen in the doorway, looking at the woman who had been larger than life in my memories but now seemed so small and fragile. Up close, I could see the toll that 3 years on the streets had taken. She had lost at least 40 pounds from an already thin frame, and her once thick hair was now wispy and gray. Her hands, the ones that used to braid my hair with such care, were covered in cuts and bruises and showed the telltale signs of intravenous drug use. But her eyes were the same. Despite everything else that had changed, despite all the damage that addiction had done to her body and her spirit, her eyes still held the same love, the same fierce maternal protectiveness that had driven her to work double shifts and sacrifice her own dreams for mine. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It was so cold this morning, so cold I couldn't feel my fingers or my toes. "There's a coffee shop about 2 blocks from." She stopped, looking embarrassed. 2 blocks from where I've been staying. I went inside to warm up, just for a few minutes. I had $3, so I bought a cup of coffee and sat at a table near the heating vent. I sat down in the plastic chair beside her bed, noting how the handcuffs had rubbed raw spots on her wrists. "So you bought coffee. That's not illegal." "I know, baby. But when I tried to stay longer, I was just trying to get warm, Diana. My hands were so cold they were turning blue. The manager said I was loitering. He said I was making customers uncomfortable just by being there." "So you left." "I did leave, but then I realized I had forgotten my bag. It has everything I own in it. Pictures of you when you were little, my mama's wedding ring, some clothes that don't smell too bad. When I went back to get it, the manager called the police. He said I was trespassing, that I was probably trying to steal something." "Where's your bag now?" "The police have it. They said it's evidence." Evelyn's voice broke. "Diana, that bag is all I have left of my life before everything fell apart. Those pictures of you are the only proof I have that I was ever a good mother, that I ever did anything right." I looked at my mother, really looked at her, for the first time in 3 years. Beneath the damage of addiction and homelessness, I could still see traces of the woman who had raised me. The woman who had read to me every night, who had taught me to believe I could be anything I wanted to be, who had worked herself to exhaustion to make sure I had opportunities she never had. The woman who had loved me enough to let me walk away when loving me became too painful for both of us. "Mama," I said, the word feeling strange on my lips after so many years of anger and disappointment. "Why didn't you call me before now? Why didn't you tell me you were in Atlanta?" Evelyn looked down at her handcuffed wrists. I was ashamed. My baby became this successful lawyer, living in a big city, wearing fancy clothes, driving fancy cars. And I'm this. She gestured to her hospital gown, to her unwashed hair, to the handcuffs that marked her as a criminal in the eyes of society. "I didn't want you to see me like this. So you were just going to live on the streets forever." "I've been trying to get clean, Diana. Really trying this time. I've been going to AA meetings when I can find them, staying at the shelter sometimes when there's space. But it's hard, baby. It's so hard when you don't have anywhere to go, anyone to help you, anyone who believes you can do better." I thought about the week she had spent outside my building. Had she known I worked there? Had she been hoping I would see her, recognize her, reach out? Or had she been torturing herself by staying close to the evidence of my success while being unable to share in it? The building where you've been staying, I said carefully. Did you know that's where I work? Evelyn's silence was answer enough. How long have you known? About 8 months, she said quietly. I saw your picture in a magazine at the library. Rising Stars of Atlanta Legal Community. Something like that. You look so beautiful, so successful, so confident. I was so proud, but I was also so sad because I knew I could never be part of that life. 8 months. You've been in Atlanta for 8 months. I've been trying to work up the courage to contact you, but every time I thought about calling, I remembered the last thing you said to me. About how you couldn't have me in your life until I got sober. About how I was an embarrassment to you and everything you had worked to become. The words hit me like a slap because they were true, and because they were worse than what I had actually said. 3 years ago, when Evelyn had shown up at my apartment in Birmingham drunk and high, begging for money she claimed was for rent but that we both knew was for drugs, I had said exactly that. But I had said it in anger, in frustration, in the desperate hope that harsh words might succeed where gentle encouragement had failed. I had never intended them to be the last words between us, never imagined that my mother would carry them for 3 years like stones in her heart. I was angry, I said. I was tired of watching you destroy yourself. But I never stopped loving you, Mama. I never stopped wanting you to get better. I know. And you were right to be angry. I was a mess, Diana. I'm a mess. But seeing you every day these past weeks, watching you walk in and out of that building in your beautiful clothes, knowing how successful you've become, it made me want to try harder to get clean. It made me remember who I used to be before the drugs took that away from me. You saw me. In the building. A few times. You never looked down at the street, never saw me sitting there. But I saw you. Evelyn managed a weak smile. My baby, all grown up and taking on the world. Just like I always knew you would. I was crying now, and I didn't care who saw it. For a week, I had walked past my own mother without acknowledging her existence. I had been so concerned about protecting my reputation, my image, my carefully constructed life that I had ignored the woman who had sacrificed everything to give me the foundation for that life. I'm sorry, I whispered. Mama, I'm so sorry. Saw you. I knew it was you, and I pretended I didn't because I was scared and selfish and… No, baby. I'm the one who should be sorry. I'm the one who chose drugs over my own daughter. I'm the one who let you down over and over again. I'm the one who broke your heart so many times you had to protect yourself by pushing me away. We both made mistakes. Before Evelyn could respond, a police officer appeared at the curtain opening. He was a young black man with kind eyes who looked uncomfortable with his role in this family drama. Ms. Washington, I'm Officer Johnson. I understand you're representing Ms. Carter. I stood up, shifting automatically into lawyer mode. What exactly are the charges against my client? Trespassing and suspected theft, though the store owner couldn't identify anything that was actually missing. Honestly, ma'am, this seems like a misunderstanding, but the coffee shop owner wants to press charges. Has my client been read her rights? Yes, ma'am. But like I said, this seems like it could be resolved without filing formal charges. The store owner mostly just wants assurance that she won't come back. I looked at my mother, at her hopeful expression, and made a decision that would change both our lives forever. Officer Johnson, I'd like to speak with the store owner personally. And I want my client released into my custody immediately. I can't do that without assurances about her living situation. She listed her address as homeless on the intake form, and the court requires a stable residence for release on personal recognizance. She won't be homeless anymore, I said firmly. She'll be staying with me. Evelyn's eyes went wide. Diana, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I looked at the police officer. Will that be sufficient for release? Officer Johnson looked between us, clearly recognizing the family resemblance now that we were standing together. I'll need to verify your address and contact information, but yes, that should work. Let me make some calls. 2 hours later, I was walking through the parking garage of my law firm with my mother beside me. She was wearing clothes I had bought from the hospital gift shop, a simple sweatsuit that was probably the cleanest thing she had worn in months. Her hair was still damp from the shower she had taken in the hospital's patient facilities, and she smelled like generic soap and shampoo instead of the street. "Diana," she said as we approached my car, "are you sure about this? I don't want to disrupt your life. I don't want to cause problems for your career." "You're not disrupting anything, Mama. You're coming home." But as we rode the elevator up to my penthouse apartment, I wondered what I had gotten myself into. My life was structured, controlled, predictable. I worked 14-hour days, socialized with Atlanta's legal and business elite, and maintained an image of effortless success that had taken years to build. How was I going to explain my homeless mother to the partners at my firm, to my clients, to the social circle that had accepted me as one of their own without knowing anything about my real background? The answer came to me as we walked into my apartment, and Evelyn gasped at the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Atlanta's skyline. I wasn't going to explain anything to anyone. I was done hiding who I was and where I came from. "Oh, Diana," Evelyn breathed, walking slowly through the living room as if she was afraid her presence might damage something. "This is beautiful. You've done so well for yourself." "We did well," I corrected her. "None of this would have been possible without the foundation you gave me." "I gave you a foundation. Baby, I gave you trauma and disappointment and—" "You gave me books," I interrupted. "You gave me bedtime stories and Sunday morning hair braiding and the belief that I could be anything I wanted to be. You worked yourself to exhaustion to pay for my school clothes and my college application fees. You drove me to debate tournaments in a car that broke down half the time because you knew I loved competing." Evelyn sank onto my Italian leather sofa with tears running down her cheeks. "I also gave you a mother who chose drugs over her own daughter. A mother who embarrassed you, who let you down, who made you ashamed of where you came from." I sat beside her and took her weathered hands in mine. "You gave me a mother who loved me enough to want better for me than what she had. A mother who made mistakes but never stopped fighting to survive. A mother who raised a daughter strong enough to claw her way out of poverty and successful enough to help other people do the same." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we're going to fix this. Together. You're going to get clean, really clean this time. I'm going to help you get the medical care you need, the therapy you need, the support system you need. And then we're going to figure out what comes next." "Diana, I've tried to get clean before. So many times. I always end up disappointing everyone, including myself. This time is different." "How is it different?" I looked around my apartment, at the evidence of everything I had achieved through hard work and determination. Then I looked at my mother, at the woman who had given me the tools to build this life even when her own was falling apart. "This time you won't be doing it alone." The next few weeks tested both of us in ways I hadn't anticipated. Getting Evelyn into a residential treatment program that could address both her addiction and her underlying mental health issues required connections I had built through years of legal work and charitable giving. Even with my resources and reputation, the waiting lists were long and the facilities were expensive. But I had something more valuable than money: a network of relationships throughout Atlanta's power structure and a reputation for getting things done no matter how complex the challenge. I called in favors from judges who owed me for pro bono work I had done on their pet causes. I leveraged relationships with hospital administrators whose institutions I had represented in malpractice cases. I used every contact in my phone to find a program that could help my mother address not just her addiction, but the underlying trauma that had made her vulnerable to drugs and alcohol in the first place. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a psychiatrist I had met at charity fundraisers over the years, ran a small private facility that specialized in treating addiction in people who had experienced significant trauma. When I explained my mother's situation, carefully, professionally, as if she were a client rather than my own flesh and blood, Dr. Mitchell agreed to evaluate Evelyn personally. The evaluation took place in my apartment, with Dr. Mitchell spending 3 hours talking to my mother about her history, her addiction patterns, her previous attempts at recovery, and her goals for the future. I sat in my kitchen, pretending to work on legal briefs while actually straining to hear every word of their conversation. "Your mother has been self-medicating for decades," Dr. Mitchell told me privately afterward. The addiction started as a way to cope with depression and anxiety that were never properly diagnosed or treated. She's also dealing with complex trauma from her childhood, from raising a child alone in poverty, and from the shame and guilt that addiction has created. "Whatever she needs," I said. "Cost is not an issue." "It's not about cost, Diana. It's about whether she's ready to do the work." Recovery isn't just about stopping drug use. It's about learning new ways to cope with pain, building healthy relationships, and dealing with decades of buried emotions. It's some of the hardest work a person can do. I looked through my living room window, where Evelyn was sitting on the balcony reading one of the books from my collection. For the first time in years, she looked peaceful, not the artificial peace of being high, but the genuine calm that comes from feeling safe and cared for. "She's ready," I said. The treatment process was harder than either of us had expected. Detox meant watching my mother go through withdrawal symptoms that left her shaking, nauseous, and barely able to sleep for days at a time. The therapy sessions brought up decades of buried pain, the childhood trauma that had made her vulnerable to addiction in the first place, the guilt over the ways her addiction had affected our relationship, the shame of ending up homeless and desperate. There were days when she wanted to quit, when the emotional work was too painful to bear, and she begged me to let her just disappear back to the streets where numbness was available for the price of whatever drugs she could buy or trade for. But she kept showing up. Every day, even when she wanted to run, even when facing her demons felt impossible, Evelyn got up and did what Dr. Mitchell asked of her. And I learned to show up too, in ways I had never done before. I rearranged my work schedule to drive her to appointments. I sat in family therapy sessions and heard truths about our relationship that were difficult but necessary. I learned about enabling behaviors I had engaged in without realizing it, about the anger I had been carrying for years, about the ways we had both been wounded by circumstances neither of us had fully understood. Most importantly, I learned to forgive, both my mother and myself. 3 months into Evelyn's treatment, I faced my first real test of how much I was willing to change my life to support her recovery. The annual Partners Retreat at Sterling and Amp Associates was the most important social and business event of our year. It was where major firm decisions were made, where partnership tracks were determined, and where the social hierarchies that governed our workplace were reinforced and renegotiated. This year, the retreat was being held at a resort in Kiowa Island, with 3 days of golf, fine dining, and networking among Atlanta's legal elite. Spouses and significant others were always invited, and the event was as much about social positioning as business planning. I had been looking forward to the retreat for months. There were rumors that the firm was considering me for the executive committee, and this would be my opportunity to solidify relationships with the senior partners who would make that decision. Executive committee membership would mean a substantial increase in income, a much larger say in firm management, and recognition as one of the most powerful attorneys in Atlanta. But the retreat fell on the same weekend as a major milestone in my mother's treatment program. After 90 days of intensive therapy and medical support, she would be graduating from the residential phase and transitioning to outpatient care. The graduation ceremony was important to her, and Dr. Mitchell had encouraged family members to attend as a show of support for their loved ones' recovery efforts. I could have rescheduled the ceremony, or asked Evelyn to understand that my career had to come first. 6 months earlier, I probably would have done exactly that, justified it by telling myself that my professional success was what enabled me to pay for her treatment. Instead, I called the retreat coordinator and explained that I wouldn't be attending due to a family commitment. "Diana, you can't miss this," Jennifer said when I told her about my decision. "The partners are expecting you. There's going to be important discussions about the executive committee, about your future with the firm. Then they'll have to have those discussions without me. What family commitment could be more important than your career? I thought you didn't have any family." I looked at Jennifer, who had been my assistant for 5 years but who knew almost nothing about my personal life. Like most of my colleagues, She probably assumed I was just another ambitious lawyer who had achieved success through single-minded focus on work, someone who had sacrificed personal relationships for professional advancement. My mother is graduating from a treatment program this weekend. It's important to both of us that I be there. Jennifer's face went through several expressions before settling on confusion. I didn't know your mother was alive. I mean, you never talk about her. She's been getting treatment for addiction for the past 3 months. She lives with me now. Oh, Jennifer clearly didn't know what to say. Addiction was not the kind of thing that got discussed in our professional environment, where everything was supposed to be perfect and controlled and successful. I'll need you to send my regrets to the partners and reschedule anything that conflicts with my new priorities. I'm going to be more available for family obligations going forward. That weekend, I sat in a circle of folding chairs in a community center conference room and watched my mother receive a certificate for completing the first phase of her recovery program. She wore a dress I had bought for her. Nothing fancy, just a simple blue sundress that brought out her eyes and restored some of the natural beauty that addiction had hidden for so long. When Dr. Mitchell called her name, Evelyn walked to the front of the room with steady steps and a straight back. She looked like the woman I remembered from childhood, confident and graceful and proud of what she had accomplished. "I want to thank my daughter," she said when asked if she wanted to share anything with the group. "Diana gave me something I thought I had lost forever, not just a place to live, but a chance to be the mother she deserved all along." I was crying openly, and I didn't care who saw it. After the ceremony, we went to dinner at a small restaurant near the treatment center. Nothing fancy, just a family-owned place that served comfort food and made Evelyn feel welcome without judgment. We talked about her plans for outpatient treatment, about the job training program Dr. Mitchell had recommended, about the small apartment I was helping her find so she could begin rebuilding her independence. "Diana," she said over dessert, "I know I have a long way to go. Recovery is a process, not an event like Dr. Mitchell says. But I want you to know that having you back in my life, knowing that you believe in me again, this is the best thing that's happened to me in years. You never lost me, Mama. I just got scared and ran away when things got hard. We both made mistakes. But we're fixing them now together." Yes, we are. The next week, I found out that I had not been selected for the executive committee. One of the senior partners, Margaret Rothschild, told me privately that my absence from the retreat had been noted by the decision-makers, and that my commitment to the firm had been questioned. "You're a talented lawyer, Diana," she said in her corner office with its view of downtown Atlanta. "But partnership at this level requires sacrifices. It requires putting the firm first, always. Personal considerations can't be allowed to interfere with professional obligations." "I understand," I said. And I did understand. I just no longer agreed with the premise that professional success required abandoning personal relationships. That conversation was the catalyst for a decision I had been considering for months. It was time for a change. Not just in my relationship with my mother, but in the way I was living my entire life. 6 months after Evelyn graduated from treatment, I made an announcement that shocked everyone in Atlanta's legal community. I was leaving Sterling and Amp Associates to start my own practice. The new firm would specialize in family law and criminal defense, with a focus on helping people who were struggling with addiction, homelessness, and the legal problems that often accompanied those challenges. I would provide high-quality legal services to clients who couldn't afford the white-shoe law firms that had dominated my career, but who deserved the same level of advocacy and expertise. "Are you insane?" asked David Sterling, the managing partner whose family name was on the building. "You're throwing away a 7-figure career to become a public defender?" "I'm not becoming a public defender," I replied. "I'm becoming the kind of lawyer I should have been all along." The transition wasn't easy. I had to learn new areas of law, build relationships with different types of clients, and adjust to a practice that was more about helping people than about maximizing billable hours. I had to rent a smaller office, drive a less expensive car, and adjust to an income that was substantial but not extravagant. But it was also more rewarding than anything I had done in my previous career. My first major case came through Dr. Mitchell, who referred a middle-class family whose teenage son had been arrested for drug possession. The parents were respectable, hard-working people who had no idea how to navigate the criminal justice system or advocate for treatment instead of incarceration for their child. I spent 6 months fighting for that young man, using the connections and skills I had developed during my corporate career to ensure he got the help he needed rather than a prison sentence that would destroy his future. I argued before judges, negotiated with prosecutors, and coordinated with treatment providers to create a comprehensive plan for his recovery. When the judge agreed to a treatment program instead of jail time, the mother hugged me so tightly I thought she might crack my ribs. "You saved my son's life," she whispered through tears. "I just gave him a chance," I replied. "The same chance someone gave me once." As my practice grew, I began to understand something I had missed during all those years of chasing prestige and money. Success wasn't about how much you earned or how high you climbed in other people's hierarchies. Success was about using your talents to make a difference in the world, to help people who needed help, to be the person your younger self would have been proud to become. And my younger self, the little girl who had grown up in a trailer park, watching her mother work double shifts to pay for school supplies, would have been very proud indeed. 2 years after I left Sterling and Amp Associates, I was invited to speak at a conference on addiction and the criminal justice system. The audience was filled with judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, social workers, and advocates who were all struggling with the same problems I had been trying to address through my practice. I stood at the podium and looked out at their faces, professionals who had dedicated their careers to serving others, but who often felt overwhelmed by the scope of the problems they encountered. 3 years ago, I began. I was a successful corporate attorney who thought I had left my past behind. I lived in a penthouse apartment, drove expensive cars, and belonged to the kind of social circles that my childhood self could never have imagined accessing. I paused, thinking about how different my life looked now. I still lived comfortably, but in a modest house with a guest room where my mother stayed when she needed support. I still drove a nice car, but I no longer cared whether it impressed anyone. I still moved in circles of influential people, but now they were judges who cared about justice, social workers who advocated for the vulnerable, and other lawyers who had chosen service over profit. But I was also a daughter who was so ashamed of her mother's addiction that I walked past her on the street for a week, pretending she was a stranger. A murmur went through the audience. This wasn't the kind of personal revelation they expected at a professional conference. I was successful by every external measure, but I was living a lie. I had convinced myself that running away from my past was the same thing as overcoming it. I thought that building walls around my heart was the same thing as building strength. I looked toward the back of the room, where my mother was sitting in the last row. She had insisted on coming to support me, even though public speaking made her nervous. She was wearing a simple black dress and the pearl earrings I had given her for her 60th birthday, the first birthday we had celebrated together in 5 years. It took seeing my mother at her lowest point to understand something crucial about the work we do. We can't save people by treating them as cases or statistics or problems to be solved. We save people by treating them as human beings who deserve dignity, compassion, and genuine care. I spent the next 45 minutes talking about my mother's recovery, about the legal and social barriers that made it harder for people with addiction to get help, and about the ways that lawyers could advocate more effectively for clients who were struggling with these issues. When I finished, the applause was sustained and enthusiastic. But more importantly, I was approached afterward by dozens of attorneys who wanted to collaborate on reform efforts, judges who were interested in expanding treatment court options, and social workers who had been waiting for lawyers who understood their clients' struggles from the inside. 6 months later, we had formed the Georgia Coalition for Justice and Recovery, a non-profit organization dedicated to changing the way the legal system handled addiction-related crimes. The coalition brought together lawyers, judges, medical professionals, and people in recovery to advocate for policies that prioritize treatment over incarceration. My mother became one of our most effective advocates, sharing her story at legislative hearings and community events. She spoke about the cycle of addiction and criminalization, about the barriers to recovery that she had encountered, and about the importance of giving people second chances to rebuild their lives. I spent years being ashamed of my addiction, she told a room full of state legislators who were considering criminal justice reform legislation. I thought I was worthless, that I didn't deserve help or compassion or hope. But my daughter taught me something important. Our past mistakes don't have to define our future possibilities. The legislation passed by a wide margin, creating new funding for treatment programs and expanding alternatives to incarceration for people with addiction. 3 years after that cold morning when I first saw my mother begging outside my office building, I received a phone call that would change our lives once more. "Ms. Washington, this is Governor Martinez's office. The governor would like to offer you an appointment to the State Board of Pardons and Paroles." I was standing in my office, smaller and less luxurious than my old corner suite, but filled with photos of clients whose lives had been changed by second chances, when I got the call. The Board of Pardons and Paroles was responsible for making decisions about clemency, commutations, and early release for people who had been incarcerated. It was an opportunity to influence policy at the highest level, to advocate for the kind of justice that recognized rehabilitation as well as punishment. "I'm honored by the governor's confidence," I said. "Can you tell me more about what the appointment would involve?" "The board meets monthly to review cases and make recommendations. Board members serve 5-year terms, and the position comes with a significant time commitment. The governor specifically requested someone with your background in both criminal law and addiction advocacy." I looked across my office at a framed photo of my mother and me at her 2-year sobriety celebration. We were standing together outside the treatment center where she continued to attend group meetings, both of us smiling with a kind of genuine happiness that comes from surviving something difficult together. "I'll need to discuss this with my family," I said. "But yes, I'm very interested." That evening, I sat with my mother in her small apartment, the first place she had called her own in 5 years, and told her about the appointment offer. "Diana, that's wonderful," she said, putting down the needlepoint she was working on. She had taken up crafts as part of her recovery, finding that working with her hands helped manage anxiety and gave her a sense of accomplishment. "You'll be able to help so many people. It would mean less time for my practice, less income. Are you okay with that?" Evelyn looked at me with the expression she used to wear when I was young and worried about something beyond my control. "Baby, when have we ever been about the money? We've been about survival, about doing what's right, about helping each other through the hard times. This appointment sounds like an extension of everything you've been doing with your practice and the coalition. It would mean being in the public eye more. People will know about our story, about your addiction, about the mistakes we've both made." "Good," my mother said firmly. "Let them know. Let them see that addiction doesn't discriminate, that recovery is possible, that families can heal from even the deepest wounds. Let them see that the daughter of a homeless addict can become someone who makes decisions about justice and mercy." I accepted the appointment. My confirmation hearing before the state legislature was everything I had expected and more. Some senators questioned whether someone whose mother had struggled with addiction could make objective decisions about criminal justice. Others wondered whether I had the temperament for the tough decisions the board regularly faced. But when Senator Richardson, a longtime opponent of criminal justice reform, asked whether I thought my personal circumstances would interfere with my judgment, I gave him an answer that made headlines across Georgia. "Senator, my personal circumstances have taught me that justice without mercy is not justice at all. They have taught me that people are more than the worst things they have ever done. They have taught me that redemption is possible for anyone who is willing to do the hard work of change." I looked directly into the cameras that were broadcasting the hearing live across the state. My mother made mistakes that hurt our family and herself. She also fought to overcome those mistakes and rebuild her life. If this board is going to make decisions about second chances, I can't think of better preparation than having watched someone earn and deserve one. The vote was closer than I would have liked, but I was confirmed by a margin of 3 votes. On my first day as a board member, my mother sat in the public gallery during our session. She wore the same blue dress she had worn to her treatment graduation, and she carried herself with the quiet dignity that recovery had restored to her. The cases we reviewed that day were typical of the board's work: A man who had served 20 years for armed robbery and had earned his GED and a bachelor's degree while incarcerated. A woman who had been sentenced to life without parole for a drug conspiracy charge and had become a mentor to younger inmates. A teenager who had been tried as an adult for a crime committed when he was 17 and had spent a decade working to understand and address the trauma that had led to his offense. Each case was a human story, a life that had been shaped by choices and circumstances, mistakes and redemption, despair and hope. Each case was a reminder that the justice system worked best when it made room for both accountability and compassion. At the end of the day, as we walked together to the parking garage, my mother took my arm and said something that made all the struggles of the past few years worthwhile. "I'm proud of you, Diana. Not because of your appointment or your success or your fancy education. I'm proud of you because you chose to use your gifts to help people who need help. You chose to be the kind of person who sees the humanity in everyone. I learned that from you, Mama." "No, baby. You learned that despite me. Despite my addiction, despite the pain I caused you, despite the shame you carried for so many years. You learned it because you have a good heart, and you chose to listen to it instead of the voices that told you to protect yourself first." We drove through Atlanta's evening traffic in comfortable silence. Two women who had found their way back to each other after years of loss and misunderstanding. As we passed the building where Sterling and Amp Associates had their offices, I thought about the woman I used to be. Successful but empty, wealthy but ashamed, accomplished but disconnected from everything that truly mattered. That woman had walked past her homeless mother for a week, too concerned about appearances to acknowledge the person who had given her everything she needed to build her life. This woman, the one I had become, would never make that mistake again. Because I had learned something that no law school or career achievement could teach. The true measure of success wasn't what you accumulated for yourself, but what you gave to others. It wasn't about climbing higher than everyone else, but about reaching back to help others climb with you. My mother had given me that lesson twice. Once when I was a child, through her sacrifices and love, and again when she was homeless and broken, through her courage to keep fighting for recovery even when everything seemed hopeless. Both lessons had made me the woman I was today. Someone who understood that strength comes from vulnerability, that success means nothing without service, and that the greatest victory is not rising above your circumstances, but rising above your own limitations to become someone worthy of the love you've been given. The rest of our story was still being written, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. But I knew the ending would be different from the beginning, because we had learned to see each other, really see each other, and that had made all the difference in the world.